The night it all went down, I was jolted awake by the sound of our motion sensors going haywire. 3 men in matching polo shirts crept across our property, clutching clipboards like they were sacred documents. They moved with the confidence of people who thought they had authority, whispering into walkie-talkies about executing the barn inspection protocol. What they didn't know was that Grandpa Joe had been watching them through his night vision goggles for the past 10 minutes. He sat perfectly still in the loft, a crossbow loaded with foam darts at his side and his Bluetooth speaker ready to blast his collection of Clint Eastwood movie quotes at maximum volume. By the time I stumbled out in my bathrobe, 2 of the intruders were zip-tied to our John Deere, and the third had abandoned his pants somewhere between our property line and the neighbor's decorative koi pond. Grandpa was sitting on the porch steps, sipping his nightly decaf like nothing had happened. "Told you they'd come back," he said with a grin that made him look 20 years younger. "Amateur hour, if you ask me. My name is Luis Blackwood, and 3 months ago, my wife Emma and I moved back to Pine Ridge Estates to help care for my grandfather." Joe Blackwood was 82, a retired Navy mechanic who'd spent his golden years turning our family property into what he called a fortress of common sense. The centerpiece was our 100-year-old red barn, which Grandpa treated like a holy shrine to American craftsmanship. Emma was 7 months pregnant, and we'd chosen Pine Ridge specifically because it seemed like a quiet suburban community where we could raise our family. The houses were nice, the schools were decent, and the crime rate was basically zero. What the real estate agent failed to mention was that the HOA was run by Mara Hutchinson, a woman who wielded her clipboard like a medieval weapon. Mara called herself a community standard specialist and drove around in a golf cart equipped with enough orange warning lights to guide an aircraft. She had the unique ability to find violations where none existed. Your grass was either too long or suspiciously short. Your mailbox numbers were the wrong font. Your garden gnome faced the incorrect cardinal direction. The barn became her white whale. It sat on the edge of our property, technically within HOA boundaries, but predating the association by several decades. Mara insisted it violated something called the Unified Aesthetic Guidelines, which apparently required all structures to be painted in shades of beige that she personally approved. "That barn is an eyesore," she announced during her first visit, standing in our driveway like she owned it. "It needs to be painted Sahara mist or desert sand immediately." Grandpa Joe emerged from the barn holding a wrench and wearing his Navy cap. "This barn's been red since before you were born, lady. It'll be red long after you're gone." Mara's face turned a shade that definitely wasn't in her fur. System, approved color palette. From that moment, we became her primary target. The violation notices started arriving daily. First, it was the barn's color. Then the non-compliant weather vane featuring a dancing pig that Grandpa's father had forged in the 50s. We got cited for unauthorized agricultural sounds when our rooster crowed at dawn. She even tried to fine us for excessive barn authenticity, which wasn't even a real violation. "She's making these up," Emma said one evening, sorting through a stack of pink notices. "Half of these reference bylaws that don't exist." I tried reasoning with Mara at the monthly HOA meeting. "The barn's been here since 1923. It's practically a historical landmark. History is no excuse for non-compliance," she replied, adjusting her reading glasses. "Rules are rules, Mr. Blackwood." That's when things escalated. Men started showing up at odd hours, claiming to be HOA enforcement officers. They wore polo shirts with laminated badges and carried official-looking clipboards. They'd photograph the barn from every angle, measure distances to property lines, and peer through windows. One afternoon, I caught one of them inside the barn itself. "This is private property," I told him. He flashed his badge. "HOA Compliance Division. We have authority to inspect any structure within association boundaries." Something about him seemed off. His badge looked like it came from an office supply store, and his polo shirt still had fulled creases from the package. When I asked for identification, he mumbled something about leaving it in the car and quickly left. I did some research that night. There was no such thing as an HOA enforcement officer in our state. These men had no legal authority whatsoever. Mara had apparently hired her nephews and some friends from her CrossFit gym to intimidate us into compliance. "She's crossed a line," I told Grandpa Joe over dinner. He smiled that mischievous smile I remembered from childhood. About time we taught her a lesson in property rights. Grandpa spent the next week transforming the barn into what he called a learning opportunity. He installed motion-activated floodlights, infrared sensors, and a speaker system connected to his vast collection of sound effects. The piece de resistance was a tripwire system that would trigger a recording of him yelling, "Intruder alert," in his best drill sergeant voice. "Aren't you worried about getting in trouble?" Emma asked, watching him string up his contraptions. "I'm protecting my property from trespassers," he said innocently. "Nothing illegal about that." He even laid a trail of beef jerky from the property line to the barn door. "Guarantee they'll follow it," he chuckled. These types always think they're smarter than everyone else. 3 nights later, our security cameras captured everything. At exactly midnight, 3 figures approached the barn. They wore dark polo shirts and carried flashlights, moving with the exaggerated stealth of people who'd watched too many spy movies. The first one hit the tripwire. Instantly, the barn erupted in light and sound. Strobes flashed, sirens wailed, and Grandpa's voice boomed, "Stand down, trespasser," on repeat. The men froze like deer in headlights. That's when Grandpa made his entrance. He emerged from the shadows, wearing his night vision goggles and carrying his crossbow loaded with foam darts. "Evening, gentlemen." "Lost?" The lead intruder tried to flash his fake badge. "HOA enforcement. We have authority." Grandpa fired a foam dart that stuck to the man's forehead with a satisfying thwack. "No, you don't." What followed was perhaps the most one-sided confrontation in Pine Ridge history. Grandpa, despite his age, moved like a man on a mission. He zip-tied 2 of the intruders to our tractor before they could even process what was happening. The third man bolted, but in his panic, he ran straight through our neighbor's backyard and fell into their koi pond with a splash that probably woke half the street. I arrived just as Grandpa was offering the tied-up men some water. "Staying hydrated is important," he told them conversationally. "Even for fake cops." The sheriff's deputies, who responded, couldn't stop laughing. They recognized one of the men as Mara's nephew, Derek, who'd been in trouble before for impersonating a parking enforcement officer at the local mall. The other was her personal trainer, still wearing his gym name tag under his fake badge. "This is kidnapping," Derek protested as they cut him loose. "No, sir," the deputy replied. "This is criminal trespassing, impersonating law enforcement, and attempted breaking and entering. You're under arrest." They found the third man an hour later, hiding behind a garden gnome in Mara's front yard, soaking wet and missing his shoes. He confessed everything before they even read him his rights. The next morning, Mara was arrested at her home. The police had obtained a warrant based on the men's statements and found a whole operation in her garage: fake badges, polo shirts with made-up agency logos, and detailed plans for Operation Barn Compliance. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was held in the Pattersons' driveway because Mara had the only key to the community center. Over 100 residents showed up, most of whom had their own stories about Mara's reign of terror. "She tried to fine me for having the wrong shade of white on my trim," said Mr. Patterson. "She measured my garden gnome with a ruler," added Mrs. Kim. "Said it was 2 inches too tall." The vote to remove Mara from the board was unanimous. The vote to suspend all enforcement actions until a full review could be conducted was equally decisive. When someone suggested making Grandpa Joe an honorary board member, he politely declined. "I'm retired from fighting tyranny," he said. "Mostly." The district attorney charged Mara with conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal impersonation of law enforcement, and violating federal privacy laws. Her fake officers faced similar charges, plus trespassing and attempted burglary. At her sentencing 6 months later, Mara stood before the judge in a beige pantsuit that would have met her own approval standards. The judge, clearly unimpressed by her tears, handed down the verdict: 18 months in prison, 3 years probation, and $40,000 in fines. Mara's jaw dropped. "But Your Honor, I was just trying to maintain property values." "By committing multiple felonies?" the judge asked with a raised eyebrow. Motion to appeal denied. Next case. As the bailiff led her away, Mara turned to look at us one last time. Her expression was a mix of shock, disbelief, and the dawning realization that her HOA presidency had just earned her a prison uniform instead of another term.